East Prussia, 1944. Nazi officers are afraid to stick their heads out of the trenches. They know that somewhere in the forest hides an invisible death. But they do not even suspect who is hunting them. This is not a hardened male veteran. This is a 19-year-old girl with the looks of a movie star and the smile of a child. Her name is Roza Shanina. To her credit are 59 confirmed destroyed enemies. But behind this dry statistic lies another story. A story recorded in her personal diary, which she kept secretly from her commanders, risking a tribunal. These are the only documents of that war written by a female hand right on the front line. In the diary, she wrote about life, about fear, about love that one could not afford at war. She wrote as if she knew that these lines would become the voice of an entire generation. Every line is like a shot into eternity. Roza did not seek glory. She simply went where she was called, to where her brothers were falling. She went voluntarily, not for medals, not for revenge, but because she could not do otherwise. Photographs of Roza are deceptive. In them, there is a smile, but the eyes already know the price of blood. In them is the cold of war, the glint of a steel scope, and the weariness of a 20-year-old girl who had seen more than many old men. Officers wrote dry numbers of victories in their reports. But numbers are not history. History is her manuscripts, field letters, and that last winter when the snow was pink with blood. Today we will open the pages of her diary. From a northern childhood to the smoking ruins of East Prussia. From first love to the last shot. This is not just a biography. This is the confession of a person who looked into a scope and saw not just an enemy. This is the story of a girl whom the war forced to become a legend. The girl from the Arkhangelsk Hinterland. In the northern silence, among spruces and swamps, Roza Shanina was born. The year was 1924. The world had not yet recovered from one war, and another was already gathering its shadows. Her native village of Yedma, lost in the Arkhangelsk region, stood on the edge of the forest. There, winters dragged on for 6 months, and the sun was a rare guest looking into the hut's windows. A little girl ran barefoot on the crusty snow, caught snowflakes with her palms, and dreamed of seeing the big world. The family was simple. Her father, Yegor Mikhailovich, was a teacher, strict but fair. Her mother, Anna Alexeyevna, worked on the collective farm, raising the children to love work and books. Roza was the third of 6. She often helped the younger ones, washed the floor, carried water, and taught them to read. From early childhood, she surprised everyone with her persistence. If she took on a task, she did not retreat. Neighbors said, "There is something in this girl." Her gaze was adult, attentive, as if she understood more than she could say. At school, Roza studied brilliantly. She especially loved literature. She dreamed of becoming a teacher like her father. But fate prepared another weapon for her, a rifle instead of a book. When collectivization began, family life became harder. Her father was often sick, and her mother took on the entire household. Roza did not complain. She knew how to hide tears behind a smile. Later, this would become her habit, not to show pain. At 14, she left the village. She walked to Arkhangelsk, almost 200 kilometers through the taiga. She entered a pedagogical college, lived in a dormitory, studied, and worked as a nanny. She wrote letters home, saying that she was not freezing or starving, although sometimes she ate only bread and potatoes for weeks. There, in Arkhangelsk, she saw a movie for the first time and heard foreign music for the first time. The city opened new horizons for her. She greedily absorbed everything: knowledge, culture, other people's fates. But even then, anxiety sounded in Roza's letters. In the west of Europe, a war was beginning, and no one yet knew that in 2 years this trouble would come to the north too. Memories of classmates preserved her image: tall, slender, with an open face and clear eyes. There was something bright in her, but already with a shade of inner determination. She often argued with teachers, defending what was right. Boldly, even stubbornly. Difficulties did not scare her, only injustice. By the age of 20, Roza graduated from college and got a job as a kindergarten teacher. The children adored her. She wore a braid, sang songs to them, and told fairy tales. In a peaceful life, she would have been destined to become a wonderful teacher. But fate chose the front for her. In June 1941, the morning was clear and warm. Roza was walking along the embankment of the northern Dvina when she heard Molotov's voice from the loudspeaker. War. She stopped, clasped her hands, and looked at the river for a long time. Thus began the story that would change her life forever. The student changed by war. June 1941 was etched into Roza's memory forever. The city woke up in silence, but people were already running through the streets with newspapers. On the front pages was the word war. Roza stood by a wooden house in Arkhangelsk, clutching a book in her hands. Someone was screaming on the street. Someone was crying. She looked silently at the sky and thought that now everything was different. For the first months, she worked in the kindergarten. While adults talked about the fronts, she hid children in the basement during air raids. She taught them to sing so they wouldn't cry. And at night she wrote in her diary, "I want to be where my brothers are suffering. I cannot hide behind the backs of others." Her older brothers went to the front in the first days. Letters from them became rarer and rarer. One day a notice arrived. "Died in battle for the motherland." She sat for a long time in an empty room, looking at the withered letter. No tears, only silence. After that, the decision matured in her finally. Voluntarily to the front, without fear, without doubts. She came to the military enlistment office and wrote an application. But she was refused. Too young, they said. Too beautiful. Needed in the rear. She returned home, but inside she was burning. A few days later, she went again. And again, a refusal. Then she began to write letters to the military enlistment office, to the Komsomol committee, to the Moscow sniper school. She wrote persistently, proving that she could be useful. One day in October 1942, an answer came. Her application was accepted. Not immediately to the front, first to training. Thus began her road to the Moscow region, to the female sniper school. The farewell to the city was quiet. She walked along the embankment of the northern Dvina, in a coat over an old dress, with a small suitcase. The wind lifted her hair, and she did not look back. She wrote in her diary, "If I return, I will tell everything. If not, let these lines remain." On the train, she met girls from other cities. All were volunteers. They sang, joked, hid fear behind laughter. Roza was silent, looking out the window. Outside the window flew a country that at that moment was dying and being born again. At the Moscow Yaroslavskaya station, they were met by officers with hard faces. They were issued uniforms, boots, rifles, and a short order. Sniper training, 2 months, then the front. Roza took the weapon, ran her palm along the barrel. The metal was cold, but a fire lit up in her eyes. Thus began her new life. School of female snipers. The Moscow region met them with dampness. Thick fog hung over the field, and drops of rain glistened on the branches of trees. Girls, barely stepping into adulthood, stood in formation. 40 faces, one oath, to serve to the end. Roza listened carefully to the instructor. Every word cut into memory. A rifle is not a weapon, but an extension of the hand. A shot is not a sound, but a decision. Studies began with the basics. Disassembly and assembly, shooting, camouflage. The parade ground smelled of gunpowder and earth. Fingers cracked from the cold, eyes watered from the wind, but no one complained. Instructors said that a sniper must be a shadow. Invisible, silent, cold-blooded. For many, this sounded beautiful until the first exam came. Targets in the form of human figures. 5 seconds to aim. 1 shot. Roza pressed the trigger for the first time. The shot was short, dull. Target hit. But her heart was pounding like a bird in a cage. She lowered the weapon and stood for a long time without moving. At night they did not sleep. They learned to crawl through the snow, shoot from under branches, change position after a shot. Every day was a new facet of war. They got used to the cold, to hunger, to loneliness. The body ached, but the soul grew stronger. Roza quickly stood out. Accuracy, attention, ability to calculate. She had a rare gift, shooting a duplet, 2 shots in one breath. Instructors looked with respect, although without a smile. She never argued, only learned, listened, absorbed. Sometimes she made notes in notebooks. A sniper is one who knows the value of a second. One day, an officer from the general staff came to the training ground. He watched the cadets shooting. After the exercises, he approached Roza. He asked quietly, "You're not afraid, are you?" She replied, "I am afraid of missing." This phrase would later fly around the school. It would be quoted as an example. But Roza herself did not attach importance to words. She just wanted to be useful, like her brothers, like thousands of others who already lay in the ground. In the winter of 1943, training ended. They were handed sniper certificates. In the girls' eyes were pride and anxiety. The war did not wait. At dawn, loading into the echelon. Roza wrote in her diary, "I look at the rifle as at fate. I don't know how many shots I will make. The main thing is that not a single one is in vain." So ended the school. The real war began. On the front line. The train creaked at the rail joints, carrying the cadets to the west. Outside the windows flashed villages, dilapidated stations, fields where craters turned black. Roza sat by the window and clutched her rifle as if it could protect her from the unknown. The front met them with a roar. Through the fog came the rumble of guns, the smell of burning and damp earth. There were no training targets here. Here, every silhouette behind a bush could be an enemy. The platoon commander gave the first combat mission. Find a position, camouflage, wait. 3 hours in the snow, motionless. The cold chilled to the bone, lips cracked, fingers lost sensitivity. When a German soldier finally appeared, Roza's heart stopped. In the scope was a living person. Not a figure on the parade ground, but one who walked, bent over, holding a submachine gun. Shot. A short jolt. The silhouette collapsed into the snow. She lay motionless until her breathing faltered. Only then did she realize. This was her first real enemy, and the first real death. In the evening, she wrote in her diary, "Today I killed for the first time. It is scary. Not joy, but emptiness." Every day the tasks became harder. They worked in pairs, sometimes alone. Waited for hours, shot rarely. Every shot had to be accurate, otherwise death could overtake the sniper herself. One day during shelling, a fragment pierced the earth nearby. Clay crumbled onto her face, ears were blocked from the sound. But she did not flinch. She raised her rifle and shot the machine gunner who was mowing down her company. He fell silent forever. Soldiers began to respect the girl. They looked at her not as a child, but as an equal. They said, "Shanina covers us. It means we will survive." She just nodded and went into the woods again. Nights were the scariest. Silence, the creak of snow, the rustle of branches. Sometimes it seemed that an enemy stood behind every tree. She listened to the breathing of the earth and learned to feel the steps of the invisible. Every day added to her experience. Every shot turned the girl into a warrior. But along with this, a shadow grew in her soul. She was silent more often, smiled less often. At war, one matures quickly. At 20, Roza felt older than her officers. Her eyes were no longer the eyes of a student. These were the eyes of a sniper who had seen too much. Hunt near Vitebsk. Spring of 1944. The front near Vitebsk hummed like a cast-iron stove. The earth trembled from artillery salvos. The sky hung low, heavy, gray. Roza no longer counted the days. She knew the smell of blood, the taste of fear, and the price of silence. Soldiers in the trenches whispered, "The sniper from the north is working again." It was her. Every morning she went to positions with a couple of cartridges and a small bag of rusks. She lay in the snow or mud, merging with the earth, could lie motionless for hours. She breathed slowly so that the steam would not give her away. Her hands no longer trembled. The rifle became part of the body, the eye an extension of the scope. She felt the shot before she pressed the trigger. Near Vitebsk, she kept score. 53 confirmed targets. But numbers meant nothing to her. In her diary she wrote, "I am not proud. I do not rejoice. I just do what I must." One day the command entrusted her with covering the company's offensive. The Germans occupied a hill, sweeping the entire field with fire. Roza and her partner, Elizaveta, crawled along the frozen ground. The snow creaked, the air rang. First, she noticed an enemy officer. The shot was quiet, like a whisper. The officer fell, followed by a machine gunner, then an observer. 3 shots, 3 deaths. Our troops went on the attack. After the battle, the commander approached her and said, "You saved the company." She nodded, wiping her hands on her greatcoat. There was dirt and blood on her fingers, and the smell of war, which is impossible to wash off. At night she could not sleep for a long time. The wind howled outside the dugout window. She remembered the faces of those she saw in the scope. They were all different, but death was the same. Sometimes Roza caught herself thinking that she was waiting for dawn with anxiety. She wanted to see the light, but knew a new order would come with it. She wrote, "We hunt not for glory. We just want someone to be able to return home." In July, an order came to headquarters to nominate her for an award. Order of Glory, 3rd class. When the order was read, she sat silently. Then she said only one word. Too early. The next day she went into the woods again. She walked through the morning fog as if on water, rifle on her shoulder, cold air in her lungs. Somewhere there, ahead, her path to legend was already beginning. Glory and loneliness. Frontline newspapers wrote about her more and more often. Photographs of Roza Shanina were printed next to headlines about victories. In the pictures, a girl in a greatcoat, with a smile, with a rifle behind her back. She looked into the lens calmly, almost coldly. But inside this photograph lived fatigue. After Vitebsk, her name was known even in Moscow. Correspondents came to the front line, conducted interviews. They wanted to see a fragile heroine, but saw a woman tired of war. Roza answered briefly, tried not to look at the camera. She didn't like being called a legend. She wrote in her diary, "I don't want glory. I want silence, just so they don't shoot." Every word was as if from ash. Victory seemed distant, like a mirage. But her successes grew. 50 confirmed targets, then 59. The command was proud of her. Soldiers believed in her sharp eye. And she felt lonely more and more often. There are no friends at war. There are only those who are still alive. Every day someone left and did not return. Roza buried friends with whom she shared rusks and the earth. Sometimes she wrote letters to their relatives instead of official notices, quietly, from herself. She smiled less and less. Even in front-line pictures, her gaze became harder. There was no longer fear or joy in it, only fatigue and the knowledge of what others had not yet seen. One day she was offered to go to the rear, to become an instructor, to train young snipers. She refused. She said, "While the war is not over, my place is here." The commander looked at her for a long time. He was silent, then nodded. He understood that it was pointless to argue. She belonged to the front, like snow belongs to winter. In December, she received a second award, the Order of Glory, 2nd class. The letter came with the commander's signature. She read it and put it in her duffel bag. Neither joy nor pride. Only a short entry in the diary. "I live because I have to." Sometimes at night she went out of the dugout and looked at the sky. There, somewhere far away, was home. There were books, mother, younger brothers. She whispered something inaudible to them and returned to the darkness. Glory surrounded her, but she did not feel its warmth. Glory did not warm. It only reminded her that she was alive among the dead. Love at war. Love at war was considered a luxury. The command forbade women intimacy with men, especially with officers. It was believed that feelings interfere with discipline. But the war itself destroyed the rules. Roza did not look for love. She was afraid of it. In her diary, she wrote, "I don't want to let anyone into my heart. I don't want to bury them later." But life still led her to a man she could not forget. His name was Nikolai, a young officer wounded near Orsha. He ended up in the same hospital where Roza was temporarily treated after a shell shock. He joked, smiled, and for the first time in a long time, she laughed. They talked at night, quietly, to the howl of the siren. She told him about her village, about her brothers, about school. He listened without interrupting. Sometimes he took her hand, carefully, as if afraid to scare her away. A few days later, he was transferred to another sector of the front. He left, leaving a note. "To Roza, you are the strongest of all I have seen. I will return. I will find you." She did not answer, only held the paper in her hands for a long time until the ink blurred from tears. Then there were months of silence. No letters, no news. She lived again amidst gunpowder, mud, and silence. But somewhere deep in her soul, this meeting remained alive, a small piece of warmth that the war could not destroy. She wrote in her diary, "Love is like a shot. It cannot be returned. One can only remember the sound." These words were found after her death. Nikolai was gone too. He died in the spring of 1945, a month before victory. Roza never found out about this. She left earlier, but maybe somewhere in the last moment she managed to remember his eyes. Those eyes where there was no fear, only life. Berlin Path. Winter was turning into spring. 1945. The front rolled to the west, crushed, broke, ground to dust everything that stood in the way. Roza walked from the front line. The snow underfoot turned into mud, boots stuck to the ground. The air smelled of burning, iron, and blood. People walked in silence. Everyone knew the end was near, but no one rejoiced. East Prussia met them with cold and empty villages. Burned houses, broken wells, traces of flight. The Germans retreated but left traps, mines, tripwires. Every step could be the last. Roza led a group of snipers. She already commanded a squad, although she was not yet 21, saw death every day. One cannot get used to it. But she learned not to notice. They occupied positions near the village of Ilmsdorf, where fierce battles were fought. Roza raised the fighters, supported with fire, called artillery by radio. She was not afraid. She said briefly, "Hold on." Bullets whistled like bees. Shells tore the earth. The wind howled in the breaches of the walls. She shot with the precision of a surgeon. Every shot, a saved life of her own. One evening, when the front fell silent, she took out her notebook again. Thin pages smelled of smoke. She wrote in uneven handwriting, "We have no right to be tired. I feel that everything will end soon. But it is scary not for myself, for those who believe in tomorrow." At dawn, the Germans launched a counterattack. Huge forces. Fire from 3 sides. Snipers retreated to the forest. Roza stayed to cover. Her rifle sang short and true. When ammunition ran out, she switched to an automatic rifle. A soldier fell nearby, very young. She leaned over, closed his eyes, and raised her weapon again. By noon, the attack choked. Our troops held their positions. But Roza smiled no more. A cold froze in her eyes, in which there was nothing feminine. The commander wrote in the report, "Sniper Shanina once again showed exceptional courage." And in her diary she wrote, "We are walking to Berlin. But how many of us will make it? I don't know." With every kilometer, it became harder. Not the body, the soul was tired. She knew that this was already the end of the path. Not the war's, but hers. January 45. January. Frost that cuts the skin like glass. Snow crunches under boots as if a bone is breaking. Everything around is white and red. White is snow, red is blood. January 20th. Battle near the East Prussian village of Ilmsdorf. The company in which Roza served came under fire. Snow rose in clouds. The earth shook. The air whistled from bullets. She crawled on the crust, pressing the rifle to her chest. Nearby a scream, someone's hands, blood on a greatcoat. Soldiers fell one after another, but she did not stop. Her gaze was calm, almost fearless. A few meters ahead lay an officer, wounded, unconscious. She saw him move, tried to get up, and then she went to him. Bullets cut branches. Snow exploded in pieces. She crawled, crouching, holding onto bush trunks. Reached him, pulled him by the collar. He was heavy, his body limply sagging. She dragged him as best she could. A burst passed very close. A piece of earth exploded in splashes of mud. Roza covered him with her body. At that moment, a bullet entered her chest. She still tried to breathe, looked at the sky. Lips trembled as if she wanted to say something. But the air escaped in jerks, like a whisper. Someone shouted, "Sister!" But it was too late. Soldiers found her after the battle. She lay face down in the snow. Her hand still held the officer's collar. Eyes were open. On her lips, a slight shadow of a smile. Roza Shanina was buried at the edge of the forest. On the plank they wrote, "Died the death of the brave." She was 20 years old. Her diary was found a few days later. Wet pages, burnt edges. The last entry: "If I am destined to die, let it be with use." She died saving another, and by this she fulfilled everything she lived for. After the shot. After the battle, the snow did not melt for a long time. For weeks, soldiers still found shell casings, shreds of greatcoats, broken rifles. In the place where Roza fell, the earth was black as coal. Frost bound everything, even tears. The company commander wrote briefly, "Shanina Roza Yegorovna, sniper, died on January 20th, 1945, while saving an officer." No details. War does not like descriptions. She was buried quickly, under a spruce. A small grave, a wooden cross, a sign carved with a knife. Then the front moved on, and the snow covered the tracks again. A few months later, soldiers returning along this road tried to find her grave. But the place had changed. The village burned down. The forest was thinned out. Traces disappeared. In the post-war years, almost no one spoke about her. Her name did not sound in reports, was not mentioned in books. Her photographs lay in archives, diaries gathered dust in a drawer. The country celebrated victory, and the memory of her was silent. Only years later, when they began to sort through military documents, someone came across her notes. Yellowed sheets, burnt edges, words written in simple pencil. They were alive. In every sentence, pain, but also light. The diary fell into the hands of a journalist. He read it and could not forget. Thus began the return of the name. The word Shanina appeared in articles again. Then came books, exhibitions, films. People read her lines and did not believe that a 20-year-old girl wrote this. So much courage, so much honesty. Without pathos, without fear, just the truth. One of the entries sounded like this: "If I die, let someone tell that I was, so they know we lived not in vain." These words became an epitaph, her voice from underground. Now her name stands next to other heroes, in school museums, in books, in the memory of descendants. But those who read her diary feel not glory, but cold. The cold of that winter where a girl lay on the snow with a scope in her hands. Roza Shanina died, but did not disappear. She remained in every line, in every shot, in every glance of those who march for the truth. Return of the name. Decades passed. The world managed to forget about the war, but not about those who remained in it. Archives opened slowly, like old wounds. Forgotten names rose from yellowed folders. Among them, Roza Shanina. Photograph: a girl in a garrison cap, with a direct gaze as if alive. Nearby, a notebook, charred edges, the smell of old paper. Scientists, journalists, historians began to talk about her again. Her diary, found by chance, became a revelation. Not a report, not a dispatch, not a frontline summary. Just the voice of a person who did not want to die, but went where everyone was dying. There was neither heroism nor pathos in her words, only the truth. About cold, about hunger, about fear hidden behind a smile, about friends she didn't manage to save. When the diary was published, thousands of people read it, holding their breath. Every sentence struck straight at the heart. Tears appeared even in those who did not know her name. Thus, the truth found a way through time. A memorial plaque was installed in Arkhangelsk. A stand with a portrait was placed on the site of her school. Teachers tell children about her as a living person, not as a legend, but as a girl who knew how to laugh and believed in goodness. In cemeteries, veterans bow their heads when her name sounds, because it is a symbol that war has no age and gender, that heroism does not require loud words. Museums keep her photographs, letters, notes. On them, neat handwriting, simple words, silence between the lines. In this silence, a voice is heard. Calm, confident, alive. Roza Shanina returned to history, not from orders, not from award sheets, from people's memory, from words written on the margins between shots. She did not live to see the victory, but she became part of its price, that price which no generation will forget. The sniper war couldn't kill. She left too early. She did not manage to see the walls of the Reichstag crumble, did not hear the victory salutes, did not live to see that morning when the red flag rose over Berlin. But she won, because her name survived the war, because her voice sounds in everyone who opens old pages, because her death was not an end, but proof that courage can be female. Roza Shanina remained in memory not as a killer, but as a person who believed in goodness to the end. She did not take revenge. She protected. She wrote about life even when she stood on the brink of death herself. More than 80 years have passed since then. But in the eyes of those who look at her portrait, the northern light is still reflected, cold, pure, transparent, like her soul. Fate did not spare her, but it gave immortality, not in bronze, not in stone, in words, in the diary that became her voice. She proved that courage is not in strength, but in truth, that heroism is not a loud word, but a quiet choice made once. The choice to go forward when everyone is retreating. The choice to look into the scope without losing humanity. Roza Shanina is alive, while we remember, while we pronounce her name, while we are not afraid to look into the eyes of the past. Because there are shots that do not kill. There are fates that are not erased by time. There are people whom even war could not kill. Subscribe to the channel to remember those who chose honor and did not forget humanity.